In this video, I'm going to cover these dot points, which come from the 6th context point of the Search for Better Health module. And what I'll do in a second, I'll talk about the verbs of each of these dot points and connect them to the content that you need to know. And also, I'll just go over each video separately, but you can cover, basically, you can jump to any of the parts if you want to by pressing any of these buttons. But I'll start with the first one, but you can jump to any ones during the actual video. So the first one says identify and describe the main features of epidemiology using lung cancer as an example. And identify just means name, recognize, and describe means provide the characteristics and features. So we need to name and recognize and provide the characteristics and features of epidemiology, and we need to use lung cancer as an example. So the study of epidemiology is actually basically a study that helps us establish the occurrence, which means where or how many people are affected by this disease, the cause, which means how do people get this disease, and the prevention, which means how to make sure that people don't get this disease. So epidemiology is a study of the occurrence, cause, and prevention of disease, especially non-infectious disease. And it's used a lot in terms of modern day life to find out, for example, what causes heart disease or cancer, etc., etc. In this example, we're going to connect these features to lung cancer. So how do we make studies that basically find out the cause of lung cancer? So first feature would be we want to make sure we collect data, especially relevant data. So we don't want to collect any data, we want to collect relevant data. So when it comes to lung cancer, we would definitely focus on age. We want to make sure we collect their age. We collect their gender as well, so if they're female or male. We want to see how many cigarettes they smoke per day. We will ask them what type of cigarettes they smoke, if they smoke, and also if they're exposed to passive smoking in their normal day, and also if they have, what kind of diet they have, so what kind of food they might be eating, right? So this would be some of the actual information we collect in terms of relevant information, be more, right? We also want to make sure we have a large sample size. We want to have 1,000 plus participants if possible, and we want to have more than one study. So ideally, we'll just have quite a few studies to make sure we can definitely link a certain cause to a certain disease. And then most importantly, we want to make sure we analyze the data. So the data we collect beforehand, we want to make sure we analyze. And one of these studies that we do to make sure we can analyze it would be the cohort study. And what I mean by analyze is we basically look at the data we collect and try to draw links between cause and effect, right? I'm going to talk about that in a second. So for example, imagine you have your 2012 cohort and you might give them all a questionnaire. So this would be your actual HSC cohort, your classmates, right? And after the HSC, they all get a questionnaire and they have to give their age, their gender, how many cigarettes they smoke, all this information we want to collect. So after they've gotten that questionnaire, they collected the questionnaire, we keep that data and we ask them again 20, maybe 50 years later. But we ask them all for all that information again, but also we try to find out who has developed the disease. Initially, we want to make sure no one has lung cancer, right? So initially, everyone will have no lung cancer. But maybe after 50 years or 20 years, maybe some people develop lung cancer. So we want to make sure we find out the difference between the information of the people who have lung cancer and the people who have no lung cancer, right? So the before and after are the same people, but just 50 years in between. Now we're trying to see, okay, if some people develop lung cancer, why could that be? That's just where we look at the data we've collected and we're trying to analyze links. So maybe, let's say all the people in green, the people who don't have lung cancer, maybe they didn't smoke, right? Or if they did smoke, they didn't smoke much. Whereas the people in red, the ones who developed lung cancer, they might be the ones who smoke heavily or are exposed to much passive smoking, right? So by collecting all this data, having these types of studies, we can basically make sure we can link the cause to a certain disease. So we can find out, for example, that smoking is caused by lung cancer. That's how we analyze data. And we also have, sometimes we have a control group. There's one type of study, epidemiological study, that has a control group, which is called the case control study. In this example, all we do is we try to find people who both have lung cancer and people who don't have lung cancer. The people who don't have lung cancer will be our controls, right? And the people who have lung cancer will be the ones we're going to collect data from both the people who have lung cancer and people who don't have lung cancer. What we're going to do is we're going to compare that study. So we're going to compare people who have no lung cancer with people with lung cancer. And again, we're trying to make links. We're trying to see how will the data be different, right? So what do the people who have lung cancer, what are they doing that people who don't have lung cancer are not doing, right? So maybe, again, smoking might be different. People with lung cancer might be smoking more or might be exposed to more passive smoking, whereas people who don't have lung cancer might be having a more healthy diet and they might not be smoking, right? So we're trying to establish these links, and we do that by looking at data we've collected and comparing control to non-control. So this was that dot point. Basically, you need to know these 4 features and how to design a good epidemiological study. Next one is process and analyze information from secondary sources to identify the cause and effect relationship between smoking and lung cancer. Identify just means name, recognized, so the cause effect of relationship between smoking and lung cancer. So it just means we need to know what causes basically lung cancer. The effect would be lung cancer itself, but we're wanting to figure out what kind of factors would cause that. So for example, we know that the more we're exposed to passive smoking, which means if your friends smoke and you're close by, the more you're exposed to that smoke, the higher chance of getting lung cancer. Also, the amount of cigarettes per day you smoke increases your chance of lung cancer. The more you smoke, the higher your chance of actual lung cancer. Also, years of smoking, the longer you've been smoking, the more chance of lung cancer. And also, the stronger cigarettes you've been smoking, the higher the chance of lung cancer, right? So these are the causes, and the effect they have will be lung cancer itself, eventually, especially, or a higher risk. You wouldn't say that we definitely get lung cancer, but just a higher risk of lung cancer. And this dot point often leads to graph interpretation questions. So you might be asked to draw a graph or interpret a graph, and this is often in past papers, often the case from this dot point itself. But all you need to know is the causes and the links to lung cancer. Next one is identify the cause of non-infectious diseases using an example from each of the following categories: inherited diseases, nutritional deficiencies, and environmental diseases. Identify causes of non-infectious diseases. In this case, identify means name, recognize. So recognize the causes of non-infectious diseases. And you need to know one of each category. So inherited disease, I've got the Down syndrome. Down syndrome is an inherited disease, and that's due to an extra chromosome. So of the pair number 21, we usually have 2, right? But in this case, this girl would have 3 of that chromosome. And that means we've got 1 too many, and that would give you Down syndrome. So it's inherited. It's due to genetics. Right? So the next one would be nutritional deficiency, which means you're lacking some kind of vitamin or mineral. And in this case, scurvy would be an example of nutritional deficiency, and that would be due to someone having not enough vitamin C in their diet, and that would give them vitamin C deficiency disease or scurvy. Environmental, this would be something due to the environment, and skin cancer would be a good example. Skin cancer is due to UV light exposure. So if you're exposed to too much UV light, which comes from the environment, so the sun is part of the environment, that would give you skin cancer. So you need to know the causes, which are down here, and the diseases which are up there. Right, and then last but not least, we've got this dot point which says identify data sources, plan and perform a first investigation, or gather information from secondary sources to analyze and present information about the occurrence, symptoms, cause, and treatment management of a named non-infectious disease. So first of all, I need to have a named non-infectious disease. The one I'm going to talk about here is coronary heart disease. You need to know about the occurrence. Occurrence means where do people mostly have it, or how many people have it. So for example, elderly, so people who are aged 50 plus, are the ones who are most likely to suffer from coronary heart disease. People most living in developed countries, such as Australia, America, European countries, these would be most likely to suffer from coronary heart disease. And in terms of how many people suffer from it, it's one of the most common causes of death in Australia and in most developed countries. Also, it's also becoming increasingly common in developing countries, but in developed countries, it's definitely one of the top causes. All right, symptoms. Symptoms just means how do you feel or when you have it, or what happens when you have it. So for example, you have high blood pressure, especially towards sort of the middle or the end of that disease. And also right towards the end, you'll get a heart attack, right? So these are 2 of the symptoms, but the actual disease itself is asymptomatic, which is also important. Asymptomatic means there's no symptoms until the disease progresses all the way towards the end, right? So if the disease takes 40 years to build up, and it does often take that long, and for most of that time, you will not know you have it until maybe it's too late. Sometimes you get a heart attack and then you die from that, but then you realize you had a heart attack or heart disease. But in most cases, it's asymptomatic until the blood pressure increases significantly, or you get a heart attack. All right, so the cause, so that means why do people get it? Well, there's some plaque buildup in the actual blood vessels. So you can see here, this is a blood vessel, and this blood vessel is actually a blood vessel that supplies blood to the heart. That's why it's called coronary heart disease. These are coronary blood vessels. These are the ones that supply blood to the heart. So there's actually a plaque buildup. As you can see, there's fatty deposits which are blocking blood flow. And eventually when that blood flow is blocked, that means your muscle cells die and the heart doesn't pump anymore. And you die from lack of blood being pumped around your body. And that's due to the fact that plaque buildup in blood vessels is a problem, and that means that is due to too high saturated fat content. So for example, if you eat animal fat too much, or anything that has too much saturated fat, that can cause heart disease eventually. Also, if you lack exercise is an important factor when it comes to preventing heart disease. So not enough of it would increase your risk, would be a risk factor. And genetics is not a risk factor. Some people have genes that predispose them to heart disease, coronary heart disease. And smoking, the more you smoke, the higher your chance of getting heart disease as well. So that was the cause. The treatment, that basically means what do we do to try to remove the disease? And we've got surgery, that'd be one way. Surgery is where we basically remove or bypass, it's called bypass surgery. We try to bypass the blocked vessels. So we might grab a blood vessel from your leg and insert that blood vessel in at your heart to make sure we can bypass the blocked one. So that would be a surgery. That's what we can do to try to treat the disease. And medication as well. So for example, we've got the statins. The statins lower the blood pressure. And we also got blood cholesterol medication. What that does, it tries to remove blood cholesterol, which is that fatty deposit. So if we take the blood cholesterol medication, we basically have less of a plaque buildup in our arteries. Still some, but less. In terms of management, what we mean by management is what do we do to try to control the symptoms and the progression of the disease? So not to remove it, but try to slow it down or make it less painful or less problematic. So management, that's what management is. So we've got, for example, people having a healthy diet. That's important. So they should change to having lots of fruit, lots of veg, and a low animal fat diet if possible. They should increase the amount of exercise, because remember, exercise is important when it comes to prevention. So regular exercise is going to be included in their management program, and so is smoking. If they're smoking, they should quit smoking, because that will slow down the progression of the disease. Right? So that was just the one you need to know about a named non-infectious disease. In this case, occurrence, symptoms, cause, treatment, and management, whichever one you choose to take. But this was just a quick summary of the 6th context point. Hopefully that was useful.